Ba-ba-da-ba-ba, boobity-boop-boo, boobity-boom-bum, zoobity-boop-boop-boo. Hey everybody, how you doing? I am Curt Covert, and welcome to another Smirky Inside. So today I'm just going to kind of top line a couple things that are going on here at Smirk and Dagger, and then I'm going to actually do a bit of a deep dive into a couple surprising things you may not know about the creation of rule books. All right, let me just get over to the comments and see who's out there. Oh, I see Eric is out there. Thanks so much for stopping by. As a lot of people have been hearing from publishers everywhere, especially if you're a backer on any Kickstarters, it is just an absolute nightmare trying to get games delivered post, and it's still during COVID, but especially in the aftermath of what all happened. The shipping lanes, docking delays, there's just, containers can't be found. We had the Suez Canal thing happen, and now we've got power outages that are happening in China, causing production schedules at factories to slow down. And I just heard yesterday that there's a bigger lockdown for COVID in China again in certain areas because they've got now that India strain that's coming in, and the dock workers are now down to about 70% of their usual numbers of people working the docks. So things are going to get worse before they get better, I'm afraid. So now that said, the Night Cage, we do understand, is shipping right now. It is on boats heading our way. Once it gets here, it'll still have some time to get off of those boats, because there are again docking delays everywhere. This is a worldwide problem for every industry, and we're all suffering. So, of course, along with those delays, there are also just amazing price hikes in the cost of getting things done, and shipping is chief among them. And it's very likely that costs for games are going to go up as a result, because when things double and triple in price for shipping, none of the companies prepared for that big a swing, and so it's going to definitely have its impact. And of course, not just board games; it's going to be a bunch of things. But in any case, the good news, of course, is that the Night Cage is finally on its way, and I couldn't be more delighted. Now, what have I been doing this past week? Well, I've been getting ready for the spill. I just got all the art in from Quanchai, as we saw last week. We talked to him and got a deep dive on his process and all the pieces that he's done for us. Of course, those are now all in layout, and I have worked real hard. I've been up till like 3, 4, 5 yesterday in the morning, getting layouts done so I can get these prototypes made, so that we can actually send them out to content providers and have people get ready for our coming Kickstarter in August. So that prompted me to think about rule books. These rule books that we all know and love, they are, some people love them. They're Bibles. They can't wait to dive into them and read between every line for every nuance, trying to get their strategy together or just understand the game. For some people, they are a hurdle they have to climb every time they want to learn a new game, and that's keeps some people out of the hobby or on the fringes and waiting for someone to help lead them into a game. But no matter how you feel about rule books, they are in fact the most important thing in the box. And ostensibly, this is what you're actually paying for, because without the rule book, there's no game. It's a bunch of fun pieces you can play with. Oh, hey, Brad, good to see you. Thanks for joining. So the interesting thing about rule books, though, is, and there are far more things that I'm going to discuss, but it just occurred to me as I was doing my layouts that there are easily 10 things you may not know about what goes into making a rule book, and I thought it'd be just kind of fun to cover them, at least as far as it goes from my personal experience. Now, I can say that in my history, I've always considered myself to be a pretty decent writer. But the truth is, as much as I've been a creative writer, a copywriter, for 20 plus years, creative writing and technical writing are very, very different worlds. And it was easy for me to convince myself that there wasn't much of a difference. And I have been learning that lesson hard for many, many years. You have to basically, if you're a great creative writer, you have to unlearn all the things you learned in order to be a great creative writer. Because technical writing, well, I'll give you a great example. So Cutthroat Caverns is, a game I created. It's probably my third game. And the rule book ended up having an FAQ about 3 to 8 pages long at some points, just because there were so many confusion points, so many gray areas. And a lot of that stemmed from the fact that I was creative writing. One of the things I think I had maybe 7 different words I used to describe an attack. When you swing, when you attack, when someone jabs you, I was mixing things up because that's what you do as a creative writer. Well, you couldn't do that, if you want people to understand the specific things. So, obviously, what you really need before you write your rule book is a glossary. Now, whether you actually write that glossary in as part of the book, or you just have it and you know what each of the things are, you've got to write it, you've got to stick to it, and those definitions really can't change. Hey, Dickie, good to see you. Brad, he's got a question here. How difficult is it to translate a rule book into other languages? So that's a really excellent question. I am not an expert on that. I certainly have had our rule books translated into other languages, but in each case, it's been that other company that ends up with someone who's proficient in both languages, who can then go ahead and make the literal and sometimes cultural language adjustments that are needed. In fact, when Yellow did Cutthroat Caverns, they retitled it to Sang Rancune, which, if I understand correctly, is a interesting pun about blood and vengeance. But it's not technically, doesn't say Cutthroat Caverns. It's a cultural translation into something that is similar or more interesting or fun. So yeah, there are both types of translations. So you need someone who's proficient in doing both the literal and culturals. Again, you've got that glossary. You're going to be really sticking to it. And man, do not describe things more than one way. And then you get really specific on the capitalization on things. What are keywords? What are not? I get tripped up all the time. I've been learning how to write a technical rule book for the past 18 years, and it's hard lessons won. I finally feel like I'm getting the hang of it after 18 years, but I still will goof up. Now, one of the things that is difficult for me also is that you also have to think about rule books in general should probably be written for a 5th or 6th grade level. Why? Well, rules are complicated enough to track along with, to understand the gameplay, and SAT words, the big money words, which I love, I use all the time because I love specific language. They just really don't have a place. They complicate the rules further and they create more barriers. Now, that said, having a really great editor is super important. And so if you find one that you work well with and you mesh, use them like crazy. They're great. They will see things that you won't, because quite honestly, as you're writing, you get too close to what you're writing and you stop seeing typos, spaces that are too many, too little, all the way to like, I wrote something that it made sense to me because I knew what I was trying to say and no one else gets it. And that's absolutely one of the things that an editor can help identify for you. Now, one of the things that I did want to tell you about was I found a really cool website recently that I find very helpful for both like adjusting grammar, reading level, all sorts of things. It's called the Hemingway Editor. And it's just, I think if you do a Google search for Hemingway Editor, you'll find it. You type in, a piece of language, a paragraph or two, and it will highlight in various colors things. It'll first of all tell you what is the reading level of what you just presented in this window. It'll highlight things where you're using the passive voice, and they don't recommend doing. I guess try to avoid as many of those as you can if you want kind of a powerful, strong language to guide people through. Too many adverbs, you basically allows for 2 before it says, whoa, back it off. And generally highlights sentences that seem more complicated than they need to be. Can you break this up in other sentences? Now, sometimes it'll offer actual suggestions. Oftentimes it'll just say, hey, this is a watch out area. Think about how you might rephrase this. I find that really, really helpful. And I've just been using it recently on the rules for the spill. So take that for what it's worth. Now, the other thing that I learned a couple of years ago is there is an actual, here in the States, a East Coast, West Coast bias in how we process rules and what kind of things we need from them. This was something that I was very surprised to hear, because I've always heard well, many times my games are like, people kind of lock into them a little bit easier on the East Coast than they were on the West Coast. And part of that, I believe, was that I wasn't writing my rule books to include this other piece. So someone finally said, hey, you know what? I write a lot of instructional manuals for software. I'm an IT person. And, when we write those manuals, we have to do it with this East and West Coast bias. And they started walking me through it. And to distill it down, I mean, there's a lot of complexities, but when you distill it down, East Coast people tend to be, very, very kind of tell me what needs to happen when. A, then B, then C, all the way down. And I just want it organized, and I want to understand a pathway of what needs to happen. What do I need to do? And the West Coast that's great. I need to know that. But if you tell me something here, and it's not necessarily apparent why, I want to know why that rule is the case. What is the implication of that rule? And every once in a while, I'll be writing a book and I'll you know what? This is something that I actually need to explain the why side of it here, so that people aren't confused and, running against a wall, and I lose them. If you can address something and just say, that's because of this, and we'll be discussing that later here, people can now process and move through the rules. It's apparently, it's helped my rule books immensely over the past 4 or 5 years. So something that, again, I never had heard of that, but really, really interesting. Well, let's see. We got some questions here. Brad says, I like rule books that have a separate details section and a 1-page quick get started guide. Yes, I actually have really enjoyed that as well. I tend not to do the quick start because it's interesting. I kind of feel like you kind of, for a lot of my games anyway, I feel like, getting started is part and parcel of the whole rule set. So I try to be kind of inclusive and parcel it out throughout. But yes, you could well, in fact, be more East Coast in that way. And Dickie wants to know if you can borrow my editor next time you write a training doc. So these are different people, but you know what? I'll have to find out who I who I have to dig up the name, because we were talking kind of broadly at a show, and I've since kind of lost contact. But yeah, just fascinating stuff as you get into writing these rule books. Now, obviously, a lot of things can happen in layout for clarity and understanding too. Let me call up some stuff here. Boop, boop, boop. There we go. All right, so here's I think this is one of the best rule books that we've done. Probably because I also stepped back a little bit, and I let Chris and Ross get involved more, and we actually normally I do all the graphic art myself, and we had someone come in and help us on this one. But here, this is one where we took the real opportunity to really make the rule book artful. And so here's just a beautiful story page. Doing this kind of thing can really welcome people into a rule book. So many rule books, you take a look at, Revolution, for example. It's got the title, and it goes right into the rules. Actually, Quack's very much the same. So, but I found that sometimes, especially these days, presentation, all right, here's a beautiful thing, I'm excited. Oh, you've got a cool story, and now here's the overview with this great graphic. Now, obviously, it has to, deliver cleanly all the contents and what you need to set up, show a nice big graphic of the game, and then, just everything, kind of set up so you can easily understand all the main concepts and then the specifics. And of course, sometimes those graphics that you use to illustrate points, sometimes they need to be more graphic just to get the point across, and sometimes they can be a lot more illustrative. But these are all, just kind of interesting things. I find that when I'm writing a rule book, and I do a stupid thing, I actually do a lot of my final rule book writing in Photoshop when I'm manipulating the images that describe things, which is crazy, and no one should do this. But I love it, because I find that as I'm creating the images that go and to explain all the various paragraphs and rules that I'm writing, I will understand what I can show and what I need to say to try to pare down the language and be as tight as I can and as clear as I can. And to me, the visual and the words have to work together. You can't do one without the other. So I do them in concert. But I know lots of people who put it in a spreadsheet and they float in InDesign, and that's actually the smartest way to do it. But so the other thing is, as you're doing all this, and here's a page of the spill. Now, this is not quite done. This is still just kind of a layout of my rules. The other thing, of course, you have to be mindful of, especially if you're doing backgrounds on your art, is to make sure it's contrasty so that you can actually read them. Putting something that's complicated behind there, it might look nice, but it's going to really complicate the read. You won't be able to see the type as well. The other thing is you have to remember that there's something called bleed. If you have a white border in your rule book, no problem. That's not an issue. But if you want color to go all the way over the edge, then this area right here, I don't know if you can see, yeah, this white area is actually a mask. If I removed that, there would be full color. This graphic actually rolls right over the top, so that when the die comes down and cuts that page, you're cutting through the graphic. Otherwise, if it shifted slightly, you might have a little white here and color here, and it gets very messy. So people will create what's called bleed, and they bleed the color off of all the edges where the die comes down. Now, a lot of things, and here's another interesting thing. Rule books have to be in sets of 4 pages. Why? Well, because you will notice that while a rule book in general is, you're reading it 1 page at a time, the pages are actually they're folded pages. So to create a rule book, you are just folding down here. Now the thing is, sometimes a book, something that has a lot of pages, they end up being called what's called in the language perfect bound, right? That's where you've got a glue strip that holds all the individual pages in, and those are just now individual pages. They're not folded over. They're just all glued in. But in a rule book, they use a staple, but it's not called a staple in the printing industry. It's called a saddle stitch. So that is what actually, that's what holds your rule book together, are these little staples that hold these very large pages that then fold down into the rule book. Now this causes an interesting thing to happen, and I got caught up in this last night. I was about to send my rule book out to the printer, and I was like, oh no, I forgot. I have to change it from what's a reader spread into a printer spread. What does that mean? Well, when you're reading, you are reading, let's see, here we go. We got pages 2 and 3. Well, that's great. And then you're going to turn the page, and then you'd have, of course, what, 4 and 5. But the problem is that page 2 and 3 is not 2 and 3. If I separate that page out, it's actually 10 and 3. And on the back of it, it is 4 and 9. So you have to cut up your rule book, and you have to make sure that when it all gets stapled together, it reads in a logical order. And I have to make one of these little dummy books every single time so I don't screw it up, because it's easy to forget, like, what page goes on where. And that's something you don't want to get wrong. So yeah, I spent all night and a bit of this morning getting the spill rule book in this printer spread. Let's see. All right. So what are the other kind of things that you like to see in rule books? Very often, I think having a pull out of strategy is always a good little thing to do that can help kind of guide people. I certainly like examples, that kind of illustrate a point. And these are things that we see in all kinds of rule books. And some I know I've sat with a rule book and said, man, this is beautifully crafted, and you really appreciate a great rule book. And of course, when it's not great, you're sitting there scratching your head like, why isn't this clear? Where can I even find this information? And so anyway, these are just a few things, and I hope there are a couple nuggets in there that were of interest anyway. I certainly find them pretty fascinating, but of course I'm in it every day. So in any case, this is just kind of a short show. Last week was a good hour and a half, so I figured, make this one a little bit tighter. Hope you guys are all doing well. And I'm looking forward to seeing everyone this convention season. If I haven't mentioned it on the show before, we are in fact going to both Gen Con and to Origins. We will have our booth there. And we're working all of our events through Envoy. So in Hall C and D, we'll have a special place where we'll have 3 tables set up doing demos throughout the day. So that's terrific. In the booth itself, I think we're playing it a little bit by ear as to, will we be doing sit-down demos, or are we going to be will it be more like a cooking show where you kind of come up and it's a touchless demo and we're just kind of walking you through how a game plays. But the team will be there. We're anxious to see everybody. It's been way too long. Brad, sounds like you are there as well. Very excited with a big woohoo. And I hope that's true for the rest of you as well. So anyway, that's it for this week. Hope you have a great week this coming, and we will see you next time. Again, go ahead and if you haven't already, like and subscribe to the various media that you're watching on, and we'll see you. All right, bye-bye now.